The mahogany gavel felt heavier than usual in Judge Sarah Mitchell's weathered hands as she reviewed the case file that had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. 27 years on the bench, and she had never encountered anything quite like this. The manila folder marked State versus David Chun, domestic violence, child endangerment, contained photographs that made her stomach churn, and witness statements that painted a picture of systematic terror within what should have been a loving home. But it was the final page that truly broke her heart, a psychiatric evaluation of 3-year-old Emma Chun, the prosecution's key witness, who hadn't uttered a single word in 6 months. Judge Mitchell adjusted her reading glasses and studied the child psychologist's report one more time. Dr. Rebecca Peterson had written in careful, clinical language that barely concealed her own emotional investment in the case. Patient exhibits severe selective mutism following traumatic incident. Child demonstrates classic symptoms of PTSD, including hypervigilance, emotional numbing, and complete verbal shutdown. Despite extensive therapy sessions, Emma remains unable or unwilling to communicate verbally about the events of September 15th. September 15th, the night that changed everything. The courtroom began to fill with the usual cast of characters that populated Judge Mitchell's World Court reporters with their silent machines, bailiffs checking security protocols, and lawyers shuffling through towers of paperwork. But today felt different. The air seemed charged with an electric tension that made everyone speak in hushed tones, as if the very walls were holding their breath. At precisely 9 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open, and Emma Chun entered the courtroom for the first time since the incident. Judge Mitchell's heart clenched as she watched the tiny figure walk slowly between the towering rows of seats, her small hand clasped tightly in her mother's trembling grip. Linda Chun looked like she had aged a decade in 6 months. Once vibrant and confident, she now moved with the cautious steps of someone who had learned that safety was never guaranteed. Her designer clothes had been replaced with a simple navy dress that hung loose on her diminished frame, and dark circles under her eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights spent wondering if her daughter would ever be whole again. But it was Emma who commanded everyone's attention. The little girl who had once chattered constantly, filling their home with laughter and endless questions, now moved through the world like a ghost. Her dark eyes, once sparkling with curiosity and mischief, had become empty windows that reflected nothing but profound sadness. She wore a yellow dress, her favorite color. Her mother had insisted, hoping it might bring back some spark of her former self. But the cheerful fabric only seemed to emphasize how much light had gone out of her world. Dr. Peterson sat in the front row, her professional composure barely masking her deep concern for her young patient. She had worked with traumatized children for 15 years, but Emma's case haunted her. The child had made remarkable progress in some areas. She could play with toys again. She had stopped the persistent nightmares, and she even smiled occasionally. But the wall of silence remained impenetrable, as if her voice had been locked away in some unreachable part of her soul. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Sarah Mitchell," announced the bailiff, and the courtroom rustled to attention. But Judge Mitchell's eyes were fixed on Emma, who stood perfectly still beside her mother, her tiny hands folded in front of her, like she was posing for a photograph that would never be taken. Across the aisle sat David Chun, Emma's father, flanked by his expensive legal team. Even in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, he managed to project an aura of dangerous control that made everyone in the courtroom unconsciously lean away from him. His cold, calculating eyes swept the room before settling on his daughter with an expression that was impossible to read. Was it remorse, threat, or simply the predatory focus of a man who had built his life on intimidating those smaller and weaker than himself? The prosecution team, led by District Attorney Maria Santos, had built what appeared to be a solid case. They had hospital records showing Linda Chun's injuries, police reports documenting the escalating violence, and neighbors who had heard the terrifying sounds coming from the Chun household. But they all knew that without Emma's testimony, without her voice describing what she had witnessed the terrible night, David Chun's high-powered attorneys would create reasonable doubt where none should exist. "Your Honor," DeSantis began. As she approached the bench, her voice steady, but her hands betraying a slight tremor, "We have a situation that requires the court's wisdom and patience. Our primary witness, Emma Chun, has been unable to speak since the events of September 15th due to severe psychological trauma." Judge Mitchell nodded solemnly. She had presided over enough domestic violence cases to understand the devastating impact they had on children. But she had never faced a situation quite like this, where justice itself seemed to hang in the balance of whether a 3-year-old could find her voice. Dr. Peterson was called to explain Emma's condition to the court. As she spoke about selective mutism, childhood PTSD, and the long road to recovery, Emma sat motionless in the witness chair that had been specially adjusted for her small frame. The chair, designed for adults, made her appear even tinier and more vulnerable, a small figure drowning in a system built for grown-ups. "The trauma has created a psychological barrier," Dr. Peterson explained, her clinical training warring with her obvious emotional investment in Emma's well-being. "It's as if her mind has decided that speaking about what happened, or perhaps speaking at all, represents a danger too great to risk." Outside the tall courtroom windows, storm clouds were gathering over downtown Portland, turning the October morning dark and ominous. A weatherman had predicted severe thunderstorms, but Judge Mitchell wondered if the real storm was brewing right here in her courtroom, where a little girl's silence might allow a dangerous man to walk free, and where justice seemed as fragile as the child who held its key. As the morning progressed and various motions were heard, Emma remained perfectly still, her empty gaze fixed on some distant point that only she could see. Her mother reached over periodically to smooth her hair or adjust her dress, small gestures of love and protection that seemed to provide the only comfort available in this intimidating place. Judge Mitchell found herself watching Emma more than she was listening to the attorney's arguments. Somewhere inside this silent little girl was the truth that everyone in the courtroom desperately needed to hear. The question that weighed heavily on everyone's mind was whether Emma would find the courage to let it out, or whether her father's reign of terror would continue because his smallest victim couldn't find her voice. The stage was set for a legal drama unlike any Judge Mitchell had ever experienced, one where the most important player was too traumatized to speak, and where the outcome would determine not just the fate of one family, but the message the justice system would send about protecting the most vulnerable among us. None of them could have predicted that the key to unlocking Emma's silence would walk through those courtroom doors on 4 legs, wearing a badge and carrying secrets of his own. The heavy silence that had settled over courtroom 3B was shattered at exactly 10:47 a.m. by the explosive sound of the main doors, bursting open with such force that they slammed against the walls like gunshots. Every head in the room whipped around as Officer Jake Martinez stumbled through the entrance, his usually immaculate uniform disheveled, and his face flushed with urgency and something that looked disturbingly like fear. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice cutting through the formal proceedings like a knife through silk. Judge Mitchell's gavel froze halfway to the sound block as Martinez struggled to maintain control of the massive German Shepherd at the other end of a straining leather leash. The dog, easily weighing over 90 pounds of pure muscle and intelligence, was pulling with such determination that it took all of Martinez's considerable strength to keep the animal from charging directly into the courtroom. "Officer Martinez," Judge Mitchell said sharply, her 27 years of maintaining courtroom order kicking in automatically. This is highly irregular. We are in the middle of... There's been a bomb threat, Martinez interrupted. A breach of protocol so severe under normal circumstances that it would have earned him a contempt citation. But these were clearly not normal circumstances. The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow, and immediately the atmosphere shifted from formal legal proceedings to barely contained panic. David Chun's attorney, Harold Blackstone, a man whose expensive suits and calculated demeanor had intimidated countless witnesses over his 30-year career, suddenly looked like he had swallowed his tongue. His client, David Chun, exhibited a reaction that struck everyone as oddly specific instead of the general alarm that gripped everyone else. His face showed what could only be described as guilty panic, his eyes darting between the officer and the exits as if calculating escape routes. A bomb threat? Dos Santos repeated, her hand instinctively moving toward her phone. When? Where exactly? Martinez was breathing heavily, as if he had run up the courthouse steps rather than taken. The elevator. We received the call approximately 8 minutes ago. Anonymous tip claimed there were explosive devices planted throughout the building, but... He paused, struggling with his next words, as Thunder, his canine partner, continued to strain against the leash with an intensity that was completely unlike his usual professional demeanor. But then we got a second call. This one was different, more specific. The courtroom had gone completely silent, except for the sound of Thunder's heavy panting and the subtle creaking of the leather leash under extreme tension. Emma, who had shown no reaction to anything that had happened during the morning's proceedings, suddenly lifted her head for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her empty eyes, which had been staring at nothing for months, were now focused with laser-like intensity on the magnificent animal fighting to reach her. Judge Mitchell noticed Emma's reaction immediately. In all the briefings, all the psychological evaluations, all the careful preparations for this day, no one had mentioned anything about the child responding to animals. Officer Martinez, protocol requires immediate evacuation if there's been a credible bomb threat. Why haven't... Because the second call was different, Your Honor, Martinez interrupted again, his voice tight with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. The caller specifically mentioned this courtroom, said the device was hidden in courtroom 3B, and that it was set to go off during the Chun hearing. He looked directly at David Chun as he spoke, noting how the man's face had gone from guilty panic to an ashen gray that suggested genuine terror. The caller knew details about this case that weren't public knowledge. Thunder's behavior was becoming increasingly agitated, but not in the way of a dog detecting explosives. Martinez had worked with this particular German shepherd for 4 years, had seen him alert to drugs, weapons, and yes, even explosive devices. But this was different. Thunder was exhibiting behavior Martinez had never seen before. The dog was whimpering softly, almost crying, while his entire focus remained locked on the small figure in the witness chair. Dr. Peterson, who had been observing Emma's every micro-expression for months, suddenly sat forward in her seat. For the first time since the September incident, Emma was showing genuine emotional response. Her breathing had changed from the shallow, careful breaths of someone trying to remain invisible to the deeper, more natural rhythm of a child experiencing real interest. Her hands, which had remained folded and motionless throughout the morning, were now pressed against the arms of her chair as if she was preparing to stand. Your Honor, Dr. Peterson said quietly, I think we need to let this play out. Let what play out? Judge Mitchell demanded, but she was watching Emma too, and she could see the subtle transformation taking place in the child. It was as if someone was slowly turning up a dimmer switch that had been set to its lowest setting for 6 months. Martinez made a decision that would later be called either the most intuitive move of his career or the most reckless breach of protocol in courthouse history. He stopped fighting Thunder's determination to approach the witness stand and instead began to move with his partner, allowing the dog to lead him down the center aisle of the courtroom. Thunder's not alerting. For explosives, Martinez said, his voice filled with wonder as he watched his partner's behavior. I've never seen him act like this. It's almost like he recognizes her. As they moved closer to Emma, something extraordinary began to happen. The little girl who hadn't shown interest in anything or anyone for half a year was now tracking Thunder's every movement. Her head turned to follow the dog's approach, and for the first time since that terrible night in September, there was something that might have been hope flickering in her dark eyes. David Chun suddenly stood up, his shackles clanking loudly. In the silence, "Get that animal away from my daughter," he shouted, his voice carrying an authority that had once terrorized his family, but now only revealed his desperation. His outburst was so violent and unexpected that his own attorney grabbed his arm and tried to pull him back into his seat. But Thunder paid no attention to David Chun's commands. The dog had served with distinction in dozens of high-stress situations, had faced down armed suspects, and searched through disaster zones. But he had never encountered anything that demanded his attention the way this silent little girl did. As he reached the area directly in front of the witness stand, Thunder did something that made everyone in the courtroom hold their breath. He sat down, perfectly straight and still, and looked directly into Emma's eyes with an expression that could only be described as gentle understanding. And for the first time in 6 months, Emma Chan looked back. The bomb threat that had brought Thunder into this courtroom was about to become secondary to a connection that no one could have predicted. A bond that would change not just Emma's life, but the entire trajectory of justice in the case of State versus David Chun. Because sometimes salvation arrives exactly when and how it's needed most, even if it comes wearing a badge and walking on 4 legs. Time seemed to stretch and bend in courtroom 3B as Thunder continued his steady approach toward the witness stand. Officer Martinez had worked with his K-9 partner through drug raids in crack houses, explosive device sweeps at major events, and crowd control during riots. But he had never felt the kind of electric tension that was now crackling through the air between his dog and the silent little girl in the yellow dress. Thunder's massive paws made no sound on the polished courthouse floor as he moved with the deliberate grace of a predator, but there was nothing threatening in his approach. Instead, Martinez recognized something he had only seen once before. In their 4 years together, the same gentle, protective energy Thunder had displayed when they had discovered an abandoned litter of puppies during a warehouse raid. It was as if his partner understood that he was approaching something precious and fragile that required his most careful behavior. Emma's transformation was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who had been watching her carefully. Dr. Peterson leaned forward in her seat, her professional training warring with an almost maternal desire to document every micro-expression, every tiny shift in the child's posture that might indicate emotional breakthrough. Emma's breathing, which had been the shallow, carefully controlled respirations of someone trying to remain invisible, was deepening. Her hands, perpetually clenched into small fists since September 15th, were slowly relaxing. "Your Honor, David," Chun's attorney, Harold Blackstone, said in a voice that carried just enough volume to be heard without seeming to shout, "I must object to this irregular procedure. There are protocols for introducing animals into courtroom proceedings, and we haven't overruled," Judge Mitchell said quietly, her eyes never leaving Emma. Something in her judicial instincts, honed by nearly 3 decades of reading people and situations, told her that she was witnessing something extraordinary. "Continue, Officer Martinez." Martinez felt Thunder's leash go slack as the dog came to a complete stop approximately 3 feet from Emma's chair. This was the critical distance close enough for connection, far enough to avoid overwhelming someone who had been terrorized. It was a position Thunder had never been trained to take, yet he assumed it with the precision of a choreographed dance. Then Thunder did something that made Martinez's breath catch in his throat. The dog, who had been standing at perfect attention, slowly lowered himself to the ground in a posture that was unmistakably submissive. Not the working posture of a police dog following commands, but the natural body language of an animal making himself as unthreatening as possible to someone he recognized as vulnerable. Emma's response was immediate and stunning. For the first time in 6 months, she moved of her own volition. Not the mechanical movements of someone going through the motions of daily life, but the spontaneous, curious motion of a child drawn to something wonderful. She leaned forward in her chair, her small hands gripping the armrests as she studied Thunder's face with an intensity that made everyone in the courtroom hold their breath. Thunder's tail, which had been held in the neutral position he maintained during official duties, began to wag slowly. Not the exuberant wagging of a pet seeing his owner, but the gentle, measured movement of a being trying to communicate safety and friendship across a species barrier. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Peterson whispered to D.I. Santos, her voice filled with professional amazement. "In all my research on selective mutism, I've never seen a response this immediate to any stimulus. It's as if she recognizes him." The word recognizes hung in the air like a physical presence, and Martinez felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the October weather outside. There was something familiar about this little girl, something that nagged at the edges of his memory like a half-remembered dream. He looked down at Thunder, whose entire being seemed focused on Emma with an intensity that suggested this was more than a random therapeutic moment. Emma's mother, Linda Chun, was crying silently as she watched her daughter display more life and awareness than she had shown since the night that destroyed their family. Her hands were pressed to her mouth, as if she was afraid that speaking might break whatever spell was being woven between her child and this remarkable animal. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers frozen over the keys as she realized she was witnessing something that couldn't be captured in official transcripts. The usual sounds of a working courtroom shuffling papers, whispered conferences between attorneys, the quiet hum of the air conditioning system, had all faded into the background as everyone's attention focused on the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. Thunder began to make a sound that Martinez had never heard from him before, a low, melodic whine that seemed almost like singing. It was the sound of a creature trying to communicate across the barriers of species and trauma, reaching out to a wounded soul with everything he had to offer. Emma's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She slid down from her chair, an action that would normally have prompted immediate intervention from the bailiff, and took 2 small steps toward Thunder. The dog remained perfectly still, allowing her to approach at her own pace, on her own terms. When Emma was close enough to touch Thunder's head, she stopped and looked into his intelligent brown eyes. Martinez could see the dog's entire body quivering with restrained energy, every instinct telling him to comfort this child while his training demanded he wait for permission or commands. David Chun was becoming increasingly agitated, struggling against his restraints and whispering urgently to his attorney. His face had gone from gray to an alarming shade of red, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. "This is a circus," he finally exploded. "You can't let some mutt influence my daughter's testimony." But his outburst had an effect no one expected. At the sound of her father's angry voice, the same voice that had filled their home with terror for years, Emma flinched and took a step backward. Thunder immediately rose to his feet and positioned himself between Emma and her father, not in an aggressive stance, but in the unmistakable posture of a guardian. Judge Mitchell watched this protective display with growing amazement. She had seen therapy dogs in courtrooms before, had even approved their use in certain sensitive cases involving child witnesses. But she had never witnessed a police dog demonstrate such intuitive understanding of a victim's emotional needs. "Officer Martinez," she said carefully, Has your K-9 partner had any specialized training in victim assistance or therapy work? Martinez shook his head, his own confusion evident. No, Your Honor. Thunder is trained exclusively in narcotics detection and suspect apprehension. He's never shown any interest in therapy work, and he's certainly never exhibited protective behavior toward strangers. He paused, studying his partner's unprecedented behavior. But there's something else, Your Honor. Something I'm just starting to remember. The judge raised her eyebrows expectantly, while Dea Santos moved closer to catch every word. Even David Chun's legal team had stopped their urgent whispered conference to listen. 6 months ago, Martinez continued slowly, the pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place in his mind. Thunder and I responded to a domestic violence call in the Riverside District. High-priority emergency, multiple units dispatched. When we arrived on scene... He stopped, his eyes widening as the memory crystallized with shocking clarity. Emma had moved even closer to Thunder now, close enough that her small hand was hovering just inches from his head. The dog remained statue still, but his tail was wagging faster, and Martinez could see the intelligence in his partner's eyes that suggested Thunder was remembering something too. When we arrived on scene, Martinez continued, his voice growing stronger as the memory became clearer, there was a little girl. She was hiding under a kitchen table when we found her. She had witnessed her father attacking her mother with... He glanced at Emma, then back at the judge. With extreme violence, Your Honor. Dr. Peterson gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest as the implications hit her. Linda Chun's sob filled the courtroom as she realized what Martinez was saying. Thunder had been there. Thunder had been one of the officers who had rescued Emma on the worst night of her life. The dog remembered her. And somehow, despite 6 months of trauma and silence, Emma remembered him too. Judge Mitchell felt the hair on her arms stand up as she realized she was witnessing something far more extraordinary than a simple therapy. Dog interaction. This was a reunion between a victim and her rescuer, a connection forged in crisis, and now being rekindled in the very place where justice would finally be served. But as powerful as this moment was, no one in the courtroom could have predicted what would happen when Emma finally found the courage to speak to the hero who had saved her life. The silence in courtroom 3B had become so profound that the sound of Emma's small sneakers touching the polished floor seemed to echo like thunder itself. Every person in the room watched with bated breath as the 3-year-old girl who had been frozen in traumatic silence for 6 months slowly closed the distance between herself and the German Shepherd, who had somehow unlocked something deep within her damaged psyche. Thunder remained motionless as Emma approached, but Martinez could see the barely contained emotion in his partner's intelligent eyes. The dog's training demanded discipline and control, but his natural instincts were screaming at him to comfort this child who had clearly suffered so much. His tail continued its slow, gentle wagging, a metronome of hope in a room full of people who had forgotten what hope looked like. Dr. Peterson's pen hovered over her notepad, trembling slightly as she prepared to document what might be the most significant therapeutic breakthrough of her career. She had read about spontaneous recovery from selective mutism, but witnessing it was something entirely different. Emma's body language was transforming before their eyes. Her shoulders were losing their defensive hunch. Her breathing was becoming deeper and more natural, and most remarkably, she was making sustained eye contact for the first time since the incident. "Emma, sweetie," her mother whispered from the gallery, her voice barely audible, but filled with desperate love and encouragement. Linda Chun had dreamed of this moment for 183 days, had prayed for it during endless sleepless nights, had begged every deity she could think of to give her daughter's voice back. Now, watching Emma voluntarily interact with another living being, she felt a flutter of hope that was almost too painful to bear. Thunder's nostrils flared slightly as Emma drew near, and Martinez realized his partner was using his incredible scent detection abilities to assess the child's emotional state. Dogs could smell fear, anxiety, and stress through chemical changes in human perspiration and breathing. Whatever Thunder was detecting seemed to be guiding his response, because he lowered his great head even further, making himself as non-threatening as possible. When Emma was close enough to touch him, she stopped and studied Thunder's face with the intense curiosity that only young children possess. Her small hand lifted slowly, hovering in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be built. Courtroom held its collective breath as she moved her fingers closer to Thunder's head. The moment of contact was electric. As Emma's tiny palm made contact with Thunder's warm fur, something extraordinary happened to both of them. The dog's eyes closed briefly, as if savoring the connection, while Emma's face underwent a transformation that brought tears to every adult eye in the room. The empty, haunted expression that had defined her features for months melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. "Good dog," she whispered, her voice so soft that only those in the front rows could hear her clearly. The two words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Judge Mitchell's hand flew to her chest as if she had been struck. Santos dropped her pen, a small plastic cylinder clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the charged atmosphere. Dr. Peterson's eyes filled with tears as she realized she was witnessing the kind of breakthrough that therapists dream about but rarely see. But Thunder wasn't finished. As Emma continued to stroke his head with increasing confidence, the remarkable police dog began to do something that left Martinez speechless. Thunder started to sing a low melodic vocalization that seemed to respond to Emma's touch like a musical instrument responding to a skilled player. It wasn't barking or whining, but something deeper and more purposeful, a sound that seemed to be coming from the very core of his being. Emma's response was immediate and breathtaking. Her face lit up with the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her since the night that changed everything. "Good dog," she repeated, this time with more volume and infinitely more joy. "Good dog, good dog." David Shun exploded from his seat with such violence that his shackles rattled like chains in a ghost story. "Stop this," he screamed, his carefully maintained courtroom demeanor cracking completely. "That animal doesn't belong here. This is manipulation. This is..." His outburst had an immediate and devastating effect on Emma. The little girl, who had just been glowing with newfound connection, immediately flinched away from Thunder, her body curling inward as if preparing for a blow. The transformation was heartbreaking in an instant. She had gone from a child discovering joy to a victim remembering terror. But Thunder's response was swift and decisive. The police dog immediately positioned himself between Emma and her father, not in an aggressive attack stance, but in the unmistakable posture of a guardian. His body language was clear to anyone who understood canine behavior. He was prepared to protect this child from any threat, including the man who was supposed to be her protector. "Bailiff, restrain the defendant," Judge Mitchell ordered sharply, her judicial authority cutting through the chaos like a sword. But her eyes remained fixed on Emma, who was now pressed against Thunder's side as if he were a furry fortress against the storm of her father's rage. Martinez watched in amazement as Thunder began the singing sound again, this time more urgently, as if he was trying to call Emma back from the dark place her father's voice had sent her. The dog's training had taught him to detect drugs and apprehend suspects, but no training could have prepared him for this moment of pure instinctive compassion. "It's okay, Emma," Dr. Peterson said softly, rising from her seat and moving slowly toward the witness area. "You're safe. Thunder is here to protect you." At the sound of Thunder's name, Emma looked up from where she had been burying her face in the dog's thick fur. Her eyes were bright with tears, but there was something else there, now something that looked like trust beginning to rebuild itself. "Thunder," she whispered, testing the name on her lips like she was tasting something sweet for the first time. "Thunder, good dog." The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Emma wrapped her small arms around Thunder's neck in a hug that seemed to pour 6 months of suppressed emotion into a single gesture. The police dog accepted her embrace with the patience of a saint, his tail wagging more vigorously as he seemed to understand that he was helping to heal something that had been broken. Judge Mitchell felt tears streaming down her face as she realized she was witnessing more than just a therapeutic breakthrough. She was watching justice begin to heal itself through the connection between a traumatized child and the hero who had saved her life. The bond forming before her eyes was more powerful than any legal argument, more convincing than any expert testimony. But what none of them knew was that Emma's newfound voice was about to reveal secrets that would turn the entire case upside down, and that Thunder's presence was triggering memories that had been locked away in trauma memories that would expose the truth about not just that terrible night in September, but about the bomb threat that had brought them all together in this moment of incredible connection. The healing had begun, but the real surprises were still to come. What happened next defied every protocol, every expectation, and every understanding of how traumatized children typically recover their ability to communicate. As Emma continued to hold Thunder close, whispering "good dog" repeatedly like a mantra of healing, the remarkable police dog began exhibiting behavior that made Officer Martinez question everything he thought he knew about his four-legged partner. Thunder's head lifted suddenly, his ears pricked forward in the alert position that Martinez recognized from countless crime scenes. But instead of looking toward the courtroom exits where danger might lurk, Thunder's intense gaze was fixed on David Chun with an expression that could only be described as recognition mixed with barely controlled aggression. The dog's lips pulled back slightly, revealing white fangs, while a low rumble emanated from deep in his chest, not loud enough to frighten Emma, but unmistakably threatening to the man in shackles. "Martinez," Judge Mitchell said urgently, "what is your dog detecting?" Before Martinez could answer, Emma surprised everyone by speaking again, her voice still small, but growing stronger with each word. "Thunder knows the bad smell," she said, looking up at the dog with complete trust. "Thunder knows Daddy has the scary things." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Dr. Peterson nearly dropped her notepad as the implications hit her. Like a freight train. Emma wasn't just speaking. She was providing testimony that could change everything. "What scary things, sweetheart?" Dr. Peterson asked gently, moving closer, but being careful not to break the magical connection between child and dog. Emma looked at Thunder as if asking permission, and the dog responded by pressing closer to her side, his presence giving her courage she hadn't felt in months. "Daddy hides things that smell bad, makes Thunder's nose upset." She pointed toward her father with a tiny finger that trembled slightly. Thunder found them before, in the kitchen, under the floor. Martinez felt his world shift on its axis. 6 months ago, during the domestic violence call at the Chun residence, Thunder had indeed alerted to something in the kitchen area. But with Linda Chun bleeding and David Chun being arrested for assault, the K9 alert had been noted, but not immediately investigated. A priority had been getting the family to safety and the perpetrator into custody. "Your Honor, Martinez," said, his voice tight with growing realization, "I need to make an urgent call to my supervisor. If what Emma is describing is accurate, we may have missed something crucial during our initial investigation." David Chun was now fighting against his restraints with such fury that his attorney, Harold Blackstone, had actually scooted his chair away from his own client. "This is entrapment," Chun screamed. "You can't use a child's fantasies against me. She's making things up." But Thunder's reaction to David Chun's outburst was immediate and telling. The dog rose to his feet, positioning himself protectively in front of Emma, while maintaining visual contact with the defendant. Martinez had seen this exact behavior pattern before Thunder was treating David Chun like an armed and dangerous suspect. "Emma," DeSantis said carefully, kneeling down to the child's eye level while staying close enough to Thunder that Emma felt safe. "Can you tell us more about what Thunder found in your kitchen?" Emma's small hand continued stroking Thunder's fur as she spoke, drawing strength from the connection. "White powder in bags. Daddy said never tell anyone. Said bad things would happen if police came back." Her voice grew quieter but more determined. "But Thunder is police. Thunder is good." The bomb squad, which had been quietly evacuating other parts of the courthouse during the proceedings, suddenly seemed less important than what was unfolding in this courtroom. Martinez realized that the anonymous bomb threat might not have been about destroying evidence. It might have been about preventing Emma from testifying, preventing her from remembering, preventing Thunder from being in the same room where his scent detection abilities could be triggered by proximity to David Chun. Judge Mitchell's mind was racing. If Emma was describing drug trafficking operations, if David Chun had been running narcotics out of his family home while terrorizing his wife and daughter, this case had just exploded far beyond domestic violence into federal crime territory. "Bailiff, I want David Chun searched immediately. Full search, including any hidden compartments in his clothing." "You can't do this." Chun screamed, but his voice cracked with desperation. "I want my lawyer. I want." Thunder's growl cut through Chun's protests like a blade. The dog had moved into a position that Martinez recognized as suspect containment, ready to act if the threat escalated. But Emma's small voice cut through the tension with words that would haunt everyone present. "Thunder protected me that night," she said clearly, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. "When Daddy hurt Mommy, Thunder came and made him stop. Thunder saved us." She looked up at Martinez with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her. 3 years. Thunder remembers the bad smell. Thunder wants to find it again. Martinez felt his heart hammering against his ribs as the full picture began to emerge. The domestic violence had been horrible enough, but if David Chun had been operating a drug distribution network from his family home, using his wife and daughter as unwitting shields, the anonymous bomb threat suddenly made perfect sense. Someone desperate enough to threaten a courthouse would certainly be desperate enough to silence a 3-year-old witness who could expose a much larger criminal operation. Dr. Peterson was frantically taking notes, documenting not just Emma's recovery, but the accuracy of her statements. Children Emma's age could sometimes confuse reality with imagination, but the specific details she was providing, combined with Thunder's behavior, suggested something far more serious than childhood fantasy. Thunder suddenly broke his protective stance and walked directly to David Chun, his nose working with the precision that had made him one of the most successful narcotics detection dogs in the Columbus Police Department. When he reached Chun's position, Thunder sat in perfect alert position and barked once, the unmistakable signal that he had detected illegal substances. "Son of a bitch," Martinez whispered, forgetting courtroom protocol entirely. Emma's father had been carrying drugs into the courthouse, using his court appearance as an opportunity to continue his criminal operations, even while facing domestic violence charges. The bomb threat hadn't been about destroying the building. It had been about creating enough chaos to disrupt the hearing and prevent Emma's testimony, because David Chun knew that if his daughter found her voice, she might reveal secrets that would destroy him completely. Judge Mitchell's gavel came down with the force of divine judgment. "Bailiff, I want this man strip-searched immediately." "Officer Martinez, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the Chin residence based on high. Your canines alert and the child's testimony." But as courthouse security moved to comply with her orders, Emma spoke again. her voice now clear and strong, carrying the power of truth that had been locked away for too long. "Thunder," she said, looking directly into the dog's eyes with complete trust. "Show them where Daddy hides all the bad things." The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos as the implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't just a domestic violence case anymore. It was potentially a major drug trafficking investigation, and the key witness was a 3-year-old girl whose voice had been unlocked by a police dog's incredible memory and protective instincts. What none of them realized was that Emma's recovered memories were about to reveal something even more shocking than drug trafficking, something that would explain not just her father's desperation, but the true reason why someone had been willing to threaten an entire courthouse to keep her silent. The strip search of David Chun revealed what would later be called the most audacious criminal move in Columbus courthouse history. Hidden in the specially modified lining of his prison jumpsuit, investigators discovered not just drugs, but something far more sinister: a detailed hit list with photographs, addresses, and schedules of everyone involved in his case. Judge Mitchell's home address was there, along with her daily jogging route. DeSantis's children's school pickup times were meticulously documented. Linda Chun's new safe house location, supposedly known only to law enforcement, was marked with a red X, but the most chilling discovery was a photograph of Emma and her mother entering the courthouse that very morning, time-stamped just 2 hours earlier. Someone had been watching them, documenting their movements, preparing for something that made the bomb threat seem like a mere distraction. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered as he studied the evidence, his protective instincts toward both Emma and Thunder kicking into overdrive. This wasn't just about disrupting testimony. This was about eliminating witnesses permanently. Thunder seemed to sense the escalating danger, his body tensing as he maintained his protective position beside Emma. The remarkable dog's behavior was becoming increasingly agitated, but not with the randomness of an animal responding to chaos. His movements were purposeful, calculated, as if he was processing information that his human counterparts couldn't yet understand. Emma, emboldened by Thunder's presence and her own growing confidence, began speaking with a clarity that stunned everyone present. "Thunder remembers the scary man who came to our house," she said, her small voice carrying across the silent courtroom with devastating precision. "Not Daddy, the other scary man. The one with the pictures." Dr. Peterson's blood ran cold. "What pictures, Emma?" "Pictures of me," Emma replied, her innocence making the words even more horrifying. "The scary man took pictures of me sleeping." Thunder barked at him. Thunder chased him away. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as the implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't just drug trafficking. There had been someone else in the Chun house that night. Someone with cameras, someone photographing a sleeping child. The domestic violence incident had interrupted something far more sinister than anyone had realized. Judge Mitchell immediately ordered the courtroom sealed and called for additional security. "Officer Martinez, I need you to contact federal authorities immediately. This has escalated beyond anything we're equipped to handle at the local level." But Thunder was already ahead of them all. The police dog had begun moving around the courtroom with the systematic precision of a search operation, his nose working constantly as he processed scents that meant nothing to the humans present, but everything to his trained senses. When he reached the gallery where spectators sat, Thunder's behavior became urgent, almost frantic. "He's alerting on someone in the courtroom," Martinez realized with growing horror. "There's someone here who shouldn't be." Emma watched Thunder's search with the fascination of a child who had found her guardian angel. "Thunder is looking for the picture man," she announced with a matter-of-fact tone that only children possess when discussing the unthinkable. "The picture man smells like the white powder. Thunder will find him." The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos as everyone began looking around suspiciously at their neighbors. Bailiffs moved to secure all exits, while courthouse security began checking identification and backgrounds of everyone present. But Thunder had already found his target. The dog stopped directly in front of a middle-aged man in the third row, who had been introduced as a court observer from the public defender's office. The man, Roger Henley, had been quietly taking notes throughout the proceedings, his presence so unremarkable that no one had given him a second thought. But Thunder's reaction was unmistakable. This was the source of the scent he had been tracking. "That's him," Emma said with terrifying certainty, pointing directly at Henley. "That's the picture man who came to our house. Thunder chased him away before, but he came back." Henley's carefully constructed cover began crumbling as courthouse security moved toward him. His hand moved toward his briefcase with suspicious speed, but Thunder was faster. The police dog launched himself forward, not to attack, but to prevent. Escape, pinning the man's arm against his seat with gentle but unmovable pressure. Inside Henley's briefcase, investigators would later discover equipment that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Professional photography equipment, surveillance devices, and most damning of all, hundreds of photographs of children from broken homes across the state. David Chun hadn't just been running a drug operation. He had been providing access to vulnerable children for a sophisticated trafficking network that used family court proceedings to identify and target victims. "The bomb threat," Martinez said as the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. It wasn't about stopping Emma's testimony about domestic violence. It was about preventing her from identifying Henley, from exposing the trafficking operation. Emma, still protected by Thunder's presence, continued to reveal details that she had been too traumatized to share before. "The picture man wanted to take me away," she said, her voice steady despite the horror of her words. "Daddy said I had to be good for the picture man or Mommy would get hurt worse." But Thunder came and scared him away. The courtroom was now in full lockdown mode as federal agents began arriving to take over what had transformed from a simple domestic violence case into a major child trafficking investigation. But through it all, Thunder remained focused on his primary mission, protecting Emma and giving her the courage to tell her story. Dr. Peterson was documenting everything with shaking hands, realizing that Emma's selective mutism hadn't been just about trauma from witnessing domestic violence. The child had been protecting herself from having to talk about something far worse, the coordinated effort to exploit her vulnerability for the most evil purposes imaginable. "Thunder saved me," Emma announced to the room, her voice now strong enough for everyone to hear clearly. "Thunder is my hero dog. Thunder stopped the bad men from taking me away from Mommy." Linda Chun was sobbing openly now, not just from relief at her daughter's recovery, but from the horrifying realization of how close she had come to losing Emma forever. The domestic violence had been terrible enough, but it had only been the surface layer of a nightmare that went deeper than any mother's worst fears. As federal agents led both David Chun and Roger Henley away in separate vehicles, Emma remained calm and secure in Thunder's presence. The dog seemed to understand that his most important job wasn't detecting drugs or chasing suspects. It was being the bridge that allowed a traumatized little girl to transform from victim to survivor, to the hero who would help save other children from the same fate. Judge Mitchell looked down at Emma and Thunder, still sitting together like they had been partners for years, instead of strangers who had met an hour ago, and realized she was witnessing something that would change not just the justice system, but her own understanding of how healing really works. The bond between them was unbreakable now, forged in crisis and strengthened by courage. But the most remarkable part of their story was still to come, a testament to the power of unlikely partnerships and the extraordinary things that happen when heroes find each other exactly when they're needed most. The truth had been revealed. The criminals were in custody, but Emma and Thunder's greatest adventure was just beginning. 3 weeks after the courtroom revelations that had shaken the foundations of the Columbus justice system, Emma Chun sat in Dr. Peterson's office, but this time she wasn't alone. Thunder lay beside her chair, his massive frame relaxed but alert, while his handler, Officer Martinez, watched from the corner with a mixture of pride and amazement that hadn't faded since that extraordinary day in court. The FBI investigation had moved with lightning speed once Emma's testimony had blown the case wide open. The child trafficking network that David Chun and Roger Henley had been operating was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. 14 children across 3 states had been identified as potential victims, and Emma's courage in speaking up had quite literally saved lives that hung in the balance. "Tell me about your dreams now, Emma," Dr. Peterson said gently, her notepad balanced on her knee as she documented what was turning into the most remarkable recovery case study of her career. "Are they different than before?" Emma's transformation over the past 3 weeks had been nothing short of miraculous. The hollow-eyed, silent child who had entered that courtroom had blossomed into a chatty, curious little girl who seemed to make up for 6 months of silence by talking almost constantly. But it was the content of her conversations that continued to astound everyone around her. "I dream about Thunder flying," Emma said matter-of-factly, her small hand resting on the dog's head with the casual comfort of old friends. "He has big white wings, and he flies around protecting all the scared kids. And in my dreams, I can fly too, because Thunder teaches me how to be brave." Thunder's tail thumped against the floor at the sound of his name, and Martinez shook his head in continued amazement. The bond between his canine partner and this little girl had evolved into something that transcended normal therapy dog relationships. It was as if they communicated on a level that bypassed the need for words entirely. Dr. Peterson made notes about Emma's progress while marveling at the unprecedented nature of the case. "Emma, when you and Thunder visit other children in the hospital, how does that make you feel?" The pilot program had been Judge Mitchell's idea. After witnessing the extraordinary healing power of Emma and Thunder's connection, she had pushed through bureaucratic red tape to create a unique victim assistance program. 3 times a week, Emma and Thunder visited the children's wing of Columbus General Hospital, specifically working with young patients who had experienced trauma similar to Emma's. "It makes me feel like a superhero," Emma replied with the serious tone that children use when discussing matters of great importance. "Because Thunder and me, we know what it's like to be scared, and we know how to help other kids stop being scared too." The results had been nothing short of extraordinary. Children who had been completely withdrawn began responding to Emma's gentle encouragement and Thunder's calming presence. Kids who had been too frightened to trust adults found safety in connecting with a peer who had survived something terrible, and a dog whose only agenda was providing comfort and protection. Martinez watched Emma explain to Dr. Peterson how she and Thunder had helped a 7-year-old boy named Marcus start talking again after witnessing his mother's murder. The boy had been catatonic for weeks until Emma sat beside his hospital bed and simply said, "Thunder will protect you while you tell your story." Thunder protected me, and now I protect other kids too. The federal agents want to interview Emma again next week, Martinez told Dr. Peterson during one of their regular coordination meetings. The trafficking network was bigger than anyone imagined. Emma's testimony has become the cornerstone of prosecutions in 4 different states. But Emma had already moved beyond being just a witness to becoming an active force for healing. Her sessions with Thunder had evolved into something resembling formal therapy work with Dr. Peterson, documenting techniques that were being studied by child psychologists across the country. "Thunder knows when kids are ready to talk," Emma explained to a new young patient during one of their hospital visits. "He sits very still and waits until you feel safe. And then when you're ready, you can tell Thunder all your secrets. And he keeps them safe until you're strong enough to tell the grown-ups." The legal ramifications of Emma's case were still unfolding. David Chun had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his cooperation with federal authorities earning him nothing more than the satisfaction of knowing that his testimony was helping to dismantle the network he had helped create. Roger Henley and 7 other defendants were facing similar sentences as the full scope of the trafficking operation became clear. But perhaps the most remarkable development was happening within the Columbus Police Department itself. Thunder's extraordinary therapeutic abilities had led to the creation of a specialized K-9 unit that combined traditional police training with victim assistance work. Other dogs were being trained to follow Thunder's example, creating a new model for law enforcement that prioritized healing alongside justice. Emma has taught us that recovery isn't just about forgetting trauma, Dr. Peterson explained to a conference of child psychologists who had come from around the world to study the case. It's about transforming that trauma into strength that can help others. And somehow, Thunder understood that before any of us did. Emma's mother, Linda Chun, had become an advocate for domestic violence survivors and was working with lawmakers to strengthen protections for families in crisis. But she credited Emma and Thunder with giving her the courage to rebuild her life from the ground up. Every morning, Emma wakes up excited about who she and Thunder are going to help that day. Linda told a reporter from the Washington Post, though she had carefully limited media access to protect Emma's privacy while allowing their story to inspire others. She's turned her worst experience into her greatest strength. The FBI had offered Thunder and Martinez positions in their Specialized Crimes Against Children unit, recognizing that the partnership between human officer, police dog, and young survivor represented a revolutionary approach to victim assistance and criminal investigation. Judge Mitchell had received national recognition for her handling of the case and her innovative approaches to trauma-informed justice. But she insisted that the real heroes were a 3-year-old girl who found her voice and a police dog who helped her remember that she was stronger than her fear. As autumn turned to winter in Columbus, Emma and Thunder's work continued to expand. They had helped 17 children find their voices, assisted in the prosecution of 12 separate criminal cases, and created a new model for victim services that was being studied and replicated across the nation. But their greatest success was measured not in cases closed or criminals convicted, but in the laughter that now filled Emma's world, laughter from other children who had learned that survival was possible, that healing was real, and that sometimes the best heroes come with 4 legs and hearts big enough to heal an entire community. The partnership that had begun with 2 simple words, "good dog," had evolved into something that was changing lives across the country, proving that the most powerful force for justice isn't always found in law books or legal precedents, but in the connections we make with those who understand our pain and refuse to let us face it alone. 2 years later, on a crisp October morning that mirrored the day their extraordinary journey had begun, Emma Chun stood before a packed auditorium at the National Center for Victims' Rights in Washington, D.C. At 5 years old, she was the youngest keynote speaker in the organization's history. But as she approached the podium with Thunder walking proudly beside her, no one in the audience questioned whether she belonged there. The auditorium was filled with FBI agents, federal prosecutors, victim advocates, child psychologists, and law enforcement officers from across the nation who had come to hear the remarkable story of how a silent little girl and a police dog had revolutionized the way America protects its most vulnerable children. In the front row sat Judge Mitchell, now retired, but serving as a senior advisor on trauma-informed judicial practices, alongside Officer Martinez, who had been promoted to director of the FBI's new Victim Canine Partnership Program. "When I was 3, Emma began, her clear voice carrying easily through the sophisticated sound system, "I forgot how to talk because bad things happened to me. But Thunder remembered me, even when I couldn't remember myself. Thunder sat in perfect position beside the podium, wearing a special vest that identified him not as a police dog, but as America's first officially recognized victim recovery canine. His chest was decorated with commendations from the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the National Association of Child Advocates. But his most treasured possession was a hand-drawn badge that Emma had made for him, colored in purple crayon, and declaring him the best hero dog in the whole world. The audience was completely silent as Emma continued her speech, her confidence and articulation remarkable for someone so young. Thunder taught me that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. He showed me that when bad people try to hurt children, good people and good dogs will always fight back. Dr. Peterson, now the author of the internationally acclaimed book, Finding Voice, the Emma Chon Protocol, watched from the side of the stage with tears streaming down her face. The therapeutic techniques that had emerged from Emma and Thunder's sessions were now being used in 37 states and 6 countries, helping thousands of traumatized children find their way back to healing. The Emma Thunder method, as it had become known in psychological circles, had fundamentally changed how law enforcement and mental health professionals approached child trauma cases. Police departments across the nation were now training specialized K-9 units that combined traditional law enforcement duties with victim assistance capabilities, all based on the unprecedented success of one German Shepherd's intuitive understanding of a little girl's needs. Emma's presentation included a video montage of their work over the past 2 years. The footage showed Emma and Thunder visiting children in hospitals, testifying in federal trials, and training other therapy teams. In one particularly moving segment, the 8-year-old boy named David, named after Emma's father, but determined to reclaim that name for good, instead of evil, spoke his first words in a year while hugging Thunder at a victim services center in Chicago. "Thunder and Emma saved my voice too," the boy said in the video. "Now I help other kids remember that they're not alone." The ripple effects of their work had extended far beyond individual healing. The child trafficking network that Emma's testimony had exposed had led to 127 arrests across 8 states and the rescue of 43 children who had been trapped in situations similar to Emma's. The legal precedents established during her case had strengthened protections for child witnesses and created new protocols for investigating cases where children were too traumatized to initially provide testimony. Linda Chun, now a nationally recognized advocate who had testified before Congress about improving victim services, watched her daughter with pride that went beyond maternal love. Emma had taken the worst experience imaginable and transformed it into a force for protecting other children, proving that even the smallest voices could create the biggest changes. "Some people think dogs can't understand human feelings," Emma continued her speech, reaching down to stroke Thunder's head affectionately. "But Thunder understood my feelings, even when I didn't understand them myself. He taught me that healing isn't about forgetting bad things. It's about using those experiences to help other people feel safe." The standing ovation that followed lasted 7 minutes, but Emma and Thunder remained calm and focused throughout the applause. They had grown accustomed to recognition, but their motivation had never been about fame or awards. Their mission was simple: ensure that no child would ever have to face trauma alone. Martinez stepped to the microphone as Emma concluded her presentation. "Thunder has taught all of us that the badge isn't just about catching criminals," he sighed, his voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes the most important police work is helping victims remember that they're survivors." After the ceremony, as photographers captured images that would appear in newspapers across the country, Emma and Thunder participated in their favorite part of any public appearance, meeting other children who needed encouragement. A shy 6-year-old girl approached them hesitantly, clutching her mother's hand. "Does Thunder really help kids feel brave?" the little girl whispered. Emma knelt down to her eye level, with Thunder moving to include both children in his protective circle. Thunder helped me remember that I was always brave, Emma said, with the wisdom of someone who had traveled from darkness into light. I just forgot for a while. He'll help you remember too. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., Emma and Thunder prepared to return to Columbus, where their real work continued. Tomorrow, they would visit 3 more children who were just beginning their own journeys from trauma to healing. They would testify in 2 more federal trials, helping to ensure that dangerous criminals could never hurt children again. And they would continue training other therapy teams, multiplying their impact exponentially. Judge Mitchell, watching Emma and Thunder interact with the crowd of admirers, reflected on how a routine custody hearing had become a catalyst for transforming America's approach to child victims. The little girl who had lost her voice had found it again, and in doing so, had given voice to countless other children who needed someone to speak for them. The bond between Emma and Thunder had grown from a moment of crisis into a partnership that was healing communities across the nation. They had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary solutions come from the most unexpected places, and that the power to change the world can fit in a little girl's heart and a police dog's unwavering loyalty. Their story had become legend, but their work was far from over. Every day brought new opportunities to transform trauma into triumph, to help other victims become survivors, and to prove that when good hearts find each other, there's no limit to the healing they can accomplish. Emma Chun and Thunder, the little girl who found her voice, and the hero dog, who helped her remember her strength, had created a legacy that would protect children for generations to come, all because they discovered that the most powerful words aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes, changing the world starts with just 2 simple words: good dog,